Most people around the world see Jamaican music as completely original, but what if part of the foundation came from Trinidad? That is the question that we want to discuss in this afternoon's program. Welcome back to another session on my Declassified Caribbean News Network channel. Thank you so much for joining. Now, today we're going to be looking at a wonderful, controversial topic, as it were, the untold Trinidad influence on Jamaican music. I'm sure that many Jamaicans are going to be upset because they think that everything is pure, right? Everything that comes out of countries is pure, but everything is not pure. Okay, there's nothing new under the sun, as the wisest man on earth said. Did Trinidad help shape Jamaican music? That's the question. In this video, we explore the forgotten Caribbean connections between Trinidadian Calypso and Jamaica's early Mento movement, and how those influences may have helped lay the foundation for ska, reggae, and even dancehall. From Lord Fly's journey to Jamaica to the evolution of Caribbean sound systems and the musical identity, this conversation dives into one of the most controversial and fascinating debates in Caribbean culture. Why did Jamaican music become globally dominant while soca remained more regional? Did Calypso influence Mento? And how did Jamaica later influence Trinidadian music through reggae and dancehall? This is a Caribbean conversation you don't want to miss. So make sure that you like it and you share it and that you leave a comment below. And let's be respectful with our comments, okay? Because we are all Caribbean people and we need to understand that we came from many different parts of the world, right? Africa, India, Europe, right? Japan, China, well, Asia. Let us say Asia, right? So we are from everywhere, from the Middle East. For decades, the world has associated Caribbean music with Jamaica. Reggae, dancehall, ska, Bob Marley, sound systems, Rastafari, Jamaican music became one of the most recognizable cultural exports on earth. But here's the question very few people ask. Did Trinidad help shape the foundation of Jamaican music? And if so, why did Jamaica become globally dominant while Trinidad's music remained more regional? Today, we are going to explore one of the most fascinating and controversial cultural debates in Caribbean history. And this is where you get that sort of debate. This is where you get this sort of deep dive. So make sure that you're liking and you're subscribing to the channel because this is the educational channel. Because the truth is more nuanced than most people realize. This is not a story about one island copying another. It is a story about Caribbean cultural exchange, migration, transformation, and ultimately reinvention. And that's what humans generally do, even in the written, the art, the work of people writing, right? In the written word, people actually copy from each other and through migration. So nobody is really original in thought, as we like to believe. And to understand it, we have to go back to the early 20th century. At that time, Trinidad and Calypso was already becoming one of the Caribbean's most influential musical forms. Calypso was more than entertainment. It was storytelling, political commentary, social criticism, humor, double entendre, and satire. Calypsonians were essentially journalists, comedians, and philosophers wrapped into one. Long before social media or podcasts, Calypso singers narrated Caribbean society through music. And because Trinidad was one of the region's busiest commercial and maritime hubs, Calypso spread across the Caribbean through sailors, migrants, recordings, traveling performers, and radio broadcasts, including Jamaica. Now, Jamaica already had its own rich folk traditions and musical identity. But during this period, Jamaican musicians began absorbing certain calypso characteristics into local music. And we tend to be very curious people. Jamaicans are curious, and they will, even in their foods, they will infuse different, what do you call it now, other cultural flavors into their pots, right? And that is why Jamaican food is so delicious in many ways. So, especially narrative storytelling, witty social commentary, rhythmic vocal delivery, satire, and audience interaction. One important figure in the cultural exchange was Lord Fly, and you can go and research him. Lord Fly was a Trinidadian Calypsonian who traveled to Jamaica and became highly influential during the development of Jamaican Mento music. So you can go and do your research on Lord Fly. And this part is important because many younger Caribbean people today do not even know that Trinidadian musicians were physically present in Jamaica during key moments of Jamaica's musical evolution. So we have to study that history because we are one people, one Caribbean region, and we have all influenced each other. And remember, during the days of slavery, that we traversed from one island to the next. And sometimes we end up in the United States, right? So we must understand that we are just not just this, we are on this rock and this is where our history starts. No, it doesn't work like that. And this is why you must subscribe to this channel so that you can get nuanced conversations. Lord Fly performed extensively in Jamaica and blended Trinidadian calypso traditions with Jamaican folk rhythms and local styles. His influence helped shape what would become Mento. Now, Mento was not simply Jamaican calypso, and this is where the conversation becomes nuanced. Jamaicans transformed these influences in something distinctly Jamaican, and that is how we are creative and innovative. Jamaicans are some of the most innovative people on the planet. I'm not saying other people aren't, but they can take something that belongs to somebody else. Let's look at the Sanchez. Look at the Sanchez, for example. The other day I was watching, a TikTok video in which this African American was suggesting, because evidently he's a fan of Sanchez, and he said that he thought most of Sanchez's music was actually original until he learned that most of his songs were covers of other people's music, right? But the way in which Sanchez delivers his music, one would have thought, okay, that if you don't know that, he is the original creator of that music. When he sings the song "Fall in Love," right? That is an amazing voice and vocals and the presentation and the music around that song that Sanchez sings, "Fall in Love." And then he gets that sort of, you know that Sanchez was, he understands what music is about, right? And that is what creativity is all about. Sometimes it's not original, but it's being able to copy things and to make it distinctively yours. And that is what Jamaican musicians have been able to do. People talk about also the different rhythms in Jamaica, and that's why perhaps dancehall became, even though that I'm not a lover of that genre, but it became global because they were able to use people's rhythm, and they use one rhythm and they have different songs from that one rhythm. Right? Something that is uniquely and distinctly Jamaican, because people are not gatekeeping that this is my rhythm and you can't sing on it. Now, Mento incorporated Jamaican rural folk traditions, African-derived rhythms, banjo and rumba box instrumentation, local humor, peasant culture, and uniquely Jamaican lyrical styles. But the Calypso influence was unmistakable. In fact, internationally, many foreign record labels and audiences could barely distinguish between Calypso and Mento, which I am not able to do myself. You hear Hilangoli Rider, Hilangoli, and all of that sort of thing. You understand that there is some connection. But might I suggest also, when you listen to merengue coming out of Santo Domingo and some of the Haitian music too, you really wonder, we are connected as a people. You just have to listen to the sounds and you say, my God, that sounds like it's a Mento music, or Calypso. So we have to make sure that we understand even the salsa and all of these sounds, you are going to hear connections, right? And that is why it's very important that we study language and culture because it helps us to be more refined and understand the world in which we live. Most of the times, people who speak one language tend to just be in a one world that they think is the reality, and there are many realities in the world. Some Jamaican artists were even marketed abroad as Calypso performers because Trinidadian Calypso already had international recognition. That frustrated some Jamaicans who felt Mento was its own cultural form. And they were right. But influence and originality are not contradictions. Let me repeat that. Influence and originality are not contradictions. Every major musical movement in history emerged through exchange. I'm going to repeat this. Every major musical movement in history emerged through exchange. Jazz, hip hop, salsa, reggaeton, Afrobeats. The Caribbean itself has always been a crossroads of cultural fusion. And that is what we have to understand. And that's what makes us uniquely Caribbean. We're not black and white, as some people say. And I like Professor Rex Netterford's expression, his encapsulation of who we are as Caribbean. Okay, as a Caribbean people, I should say. Here, people using the word Caribbeans, I don't like that. But as a Caribbean people, we are uniquely Caribbean. He says that we're neither African nor Indians. We are part African, we are part Asian, and part indigenous, right? Part European. All of that fusion makes us distinctively Caribbean. So when we're talking about this black and this white and this Asian, whatever, that is not our reality. That is the reality that is coming from the United States of America due to its laws of segregation. We never had those segregation laws in the region. Hence, we have more of a fusion, and that is also what makes our food very delicious. Now, here's where things become even more interesting because Mento would later become one of the foundations of ska, and ska would eventually evolve into rocksteady, dub, and dancehall. So while Trinidad did not create reggae, and we're not suggesting here that Trinidad created reggae, okay, there is a legitimate historical argument that calypso traditions influenced some of the early ingredients that contributed to Jamaica's musical evolution. So I don't want you to come and say that, oh, Trinidadians, created reggae. They influenced it. Their musical genre, calypso, influenced it, and other genres too, as we said, ska and rocksteady. And we don't need to get into ourselves. I'm seeing some very nasty behavior. Last night I was on TikTok scrolling and I saw this Jamaican guy, and apparently there was a Trinidadian flag that came into his live, and the nasty language that he used about Trinidad. I was very, very much taken. I was struck. I was dumbfounded to know that he could get a live because I've seen his videos before. I thought he was doing them for views because many people, you can't take them seriously on social media, right? But he was on a live, and the way he was speaking, because somebody from Trinidad was showing the Trinidadian flag, where are we going with that? This hostility that he was showing toward, I'm not sure if the person was a Trinidadian or just waving the Trinidad flag in his chat. And he became so much annoyed and, he lost his temper, especially in areas like lyrical structure, storytelling, humor, crowd engagement, and melodic phrasing. But then something extraordinary happened. Jamaica took those influences and created one of the most powerful music export systems the world has ever seen. And this is where the story flips. Because while Trinidad influenced every or early Jamaican music, not ever, but early Jamaican music, Jamaica later became the dominant musical influence across much of the Caribbean, including Trinidad itself. Let me repeat that. because while Trinidad influenced early Jamaican music, Jamaica later became the dominant musical influence across much of the Caribbean, including Trinidad itself. By the 90s, or 1970s rather, and especially the early 1980s and 90s, well, let me repeat that, I'm thinking, confusing myself here. By the 1970s, and especially the 1980s and 1990s, reggae and dancehall had exploded internationally, and Jamaica's influence became impossible to ignore. You could hear it everywhere in London, New York, Toronto, Africa, Latin America, and eventually deeply inside Trinidadian music itself. Modern soca increasingly absorbed dancehall energy, Jamaican style DJ delivery, bass heavy production, patois influence, sound system culture, and dancehall inspired flows. Artists like Michelle Montano and Bunji Garlin emerged in a Caribbean music ecosystem already heavily shaped by Jamaica's global cultural dominance. In fact, some Trinidadians even began worrying that soca was becoming too dancehall. That is how powerful Jamaica's influence became. So the relationship between Trinidad and Jamaica was never one directional. It evolved in phases. Okay, and that is what we have to understand. We tend to be too nationalistic, and we have to get out of that and understand the world as it is and the realities. First, Trinidad and Calypso influenced aspects of Jamaican Mento culture. Then, Jamaica transformed those influences into entirely new genres. And later, Jamaican reggae and dancehall began heavily influencing modern Trinidadian music and youth culture. This is why simplistic nationalist arguments usually fail, because Caribbean music has always been interconnected. It's a word that I like to use on this channel. Caribbean music has always been interconnected, just like the economy or the economies of our world are interconnected. Now, another important question emerges. If Trinidad helped influence early Jamaican music, why did Jamaica become globally dominant? Why didn't Trinidad, or why hasn't Trinidad produced lots of the artists that Jamaica has produced? And I should say global artists, because they have produced a lot of artists, but I'm saying now global artists. Why does almost everyone in the world know Jamaica, while many people globally still know little about Trinidad? And honestly, that is where the conversation gets uncomfortable for some people, because Jamaica did something culturally that very few small countries have ever achieved. Jamaica exported not just music, but identity. Reggae became connected to resistance, rebellion, Black consciousness, anti colonial struggle, spirituality, and global youth culture. Bob Marley transformed the Jamaican music into a universal political language. Then dancehall expanded Jamaican culture even further through fashion, slang, dance, internet culture, and street aesthetics. Jamaica built a complete music ecosystem: producers, studios, selectors, DJs, sound clashes, independent labels, and aggressive diaspora distribution networks. Meanwhile, Trinidad's biggest cultural export, soca, remained deeply connected to carnival culture. And carnival is seasonal. It explodes during carnival season, then cools down afterward. Reggae and dancehall, however, became year-round global lifestyles. That difference mattered enormously. And there's another factor people rarely discuss honestly. Jamaica developed an almost mythical global image. When people hear Jamaica, they instantly think reggae, dreadlocks, Usain Bolt, Rastafari, dancehall, jerk chicken, beaches, rebellion, and cultural swagger. Jamaica became a brand. Okay, but the brand is not helping us to grow, neither to develop. It's just a brand, and that is what we have to understand. And a very powerful one too. And that's the one that we are saying, and Jamaica to the world, Jamaica is the capital of the Caribbean, but a brand cannot build us. A brand cannot earn us respectability. It can help us to be cool, and people in the world now like entertainment and they like to see people who are cool. But outside of that, if they don't see development, they're not going to earn, we're not going to earn their respect. Very important that Jamaicans understand this reality. Meanwhile, many people outside the Caribbean still know very little about Trinidad and Tobago beyond Carnival. And you can see this online today. There are Trinidadians who vlog internationally and constantly say that when people ask where they're from, many immediately assume they're Jamaican when they say that they're from the Caribbean. Okay, so let's be clear about that. If they say where you're from, and they say that they're from the Caribbean, and so what country, and they might say Trinidad and Tobago, and people say, begin to say what, But the fact of the matter is because they associate the Caribbean with Jamaica. That says something about Jamaica's cultural visibility globally. But none of this erases Trinidad's enormous contribution to Caribbean civilization. Without Trinidad, Calypso would not exist in the form we know it. Steel pan culture would look very different. Carnival culture across the diaspora would not be the same, and early Caribbean political musical commentary would have evolved differently. At the same time, without Jamaica, reggae would not have reshaped global music. Dancehall would not have influenced hip hop, reggaeton, Afrobeats, and global pop culture. And Caribbean culture would not have achieved the same worldwide penetration. So perhaps the real lesson here is not competition. Perhaps the real lesson is that Caribbean culture became powerful precisely because the islands influenced each other. Wonderful fusion, isn't it? Trinidad influenced Jamaica. Jamaica influenced Trinidad, and together both transformed global music forever. The Caribbean has never been culturally isolated. The Caribbean has never been culturally isolated. It has always been connected. And maybe that is the untold story people need to understand. And there is a Trinidadian who has a blog here that he has written, and the title is Strong Musical Influence Between TNT and Jamaica Over the Years. And he says here, I'm going to end the conversation here, I have created this thread to demonstrate and discuss the strong musical influence between TNT and Jamaica over the years, which goes both ways and always has. And boy, that's why we're having this sort of rift between Trinidad and Jamaica, because culturally we are dominant in the world. If any of you want to add the discussion or to confirm or dispute a point I have made below, then you are more than welcomed. If we look at the history, Calypso was one of the first music genres in the Caribbean to be distinctly developed and to be internationally recognized as such. Yes, every Caribbean island had their own slave work songs, which became the basis of their folk music. But the next step in the process is to develop your own distinctive music genre, and Calypso was the first distinctive, sophisticated Caribbean music genre to be established. And he's right. Trinidad's Calypso, due to the international recognition it quickly attained in the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, and 50s, strongly influenced the development of Mento in Jamaica to the extent that the Jamaicans even started to rebrand many of their Mentos as Calypsos for marketing purposes in the 50s. So Bob Marley was not wrong when he was asked in an interview, it's circulating on TikTok and social media, that what influenced Jamaican music, and he did say Calypso. He didn't say Trinidadian Calypso, but he said Calypso. People were always listening to and responding to Calypso. So in the late 50s, early 60s, during the failed West Indies Federation era, many top Trinidad musicians and Calypsonians traveled to Jamaica to perform, and some like Lord Creator or Lord Briner, Lord Lauro, and talented arranger, band leader Lynn Tate decided to settle in Jamaica after independence because of the amount of work they were getting as singers and musicians on the hill and circuit there. So this is where I am going to stop here because there's some commotion here. I don't know what's going on here with the noise outside, but yeah, I think this is something that you have to think about because we're one people and our music is interconnected. Our culture is interconnected. Thank you so much for joining.